by welcoming you and welcoming everybody that's here today. First, maybe I can introduce myself. It can be great to do that. As you can hear, I have a French accent. I am Florence Guiliani. My name is Florence Guiliani, and I work at Sherbrooke University in Quebec, the French part of Canada. So I am one of the co-editors of a special issue on entrepreneurship and health, published in the Entrepreneurship Revue last December, along with Olivier Torrès and Thurik. So we are so excited to have you join us today for this webinar on this topic, on this special topic, this exciting new field of research. So since we can see you on the attendees, the participants, can you show us that you are with us today by putting an emoticon or something that we can see that we're not talking along ourselves anymore? Great, we can see that. It gives us some encouragement too. So thank you all. So this webinar aim to continue the outreach of the special issue and let people know about our work, what we think about this topic, what can we add about this field. So we had a webinar, a first webinar on February, where two papers were presented. And today we want to continue because it was people liked this webinar, so we want to continue outreach the interest about this topic. So I will put the link if you would like to read research. I will put the link of the special issue on the chat. If you would like to read it, please, you are welcome, and let us know what you think about it. So for today's program, we have Bérangère Deschamps. Bérangère Deschamps is one of the editor-in-chief of the Entrepreneurship Revue. She agreed, and we thank her for that, to give us a 5-minute presentation about the review. And then I will talk a little bit more, but not too much, about the special issue. And then you come today. Four of the author will give us, agree to give us a 10-minute presentation about the article, let us know what it is about. It's like a teaser. We want you to have a strong impulse to read this article and to continue to talk about it and to give us some feedback, anything about it. And if we have a little bit time, I will present the article Olivier, Roy and I wrote, but it will be really short, really a teaser, like in a movie. So maybe Bérangère, if you are ready, I can let you and make the introduction about the review.
Thank you so much. A few words about the review. So I'm French also. The Revue de l'Entrepreneuriat, Review of Entrepreneurship, is a journal published in 2 languages. So in French, and it's available on Cairn, and in English on Cairn International. The journal is ranked at the French ranking, and also for now in the international ranking Scopus. The editorial team is composed of 8 associated editors, who are 2 editors-in-chief and 1 editing secretary. We have the review published regularly with about 4 issues by year. And we have now the tradition of launching a call for special issue twice a year. And the special issue on health and entrepreneurship is the concretization of the incredible work from Florence, Olivier, and Roy, that I want to thank you so much, because this is a really nice special issue. And I also thank them for the organization of this webinar, and maybe we can start a webinar. It's okay for the journal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bérangère. Yes, I will speak a little bit more about the special issue, and then we can move on about the presentation. So in this special issue, you can find the link in the chat. You will be able to read 7 articles. The first article is an introduction, and 6 articles that you can read. 4 of them will be presented today. So I will speak a little bit about the one will not be presented because they were presented last February. It was on entrepreneur attitude toward health, and it was wrote by Elchebes and Parashiv. And the other one was about psychological health and entrepreneurial career commitment during COVID-19. So it was wrote by Saint-Jean, Chouchan, and Tremblay. So this is another way of talking about entrepreneurship and health. And maybe we can start the presentation. We are in a small group. We can take some questions if you have questions after one of the presentation, not all. I'm dreaming of ton and ton of questions, but we can take 1, 2, 3 questions depending on the time we have. And maybe we can start. I don't know if the author agree. Yes, we can start by I don't know who want to start. The program was saying that maybe Martina, you will like to try?
Yeah, no problem. Good.
Excuse me. Florence, il y a Roy et Olivier qui me disent qu'ils n'ont pas le lien. Donc, je leur ai envoyé le mien, mais je ne sais pas si ça va marcher.
Non, je vais leur envoyer.
OK.
Merci, merci.
Good. Can you see the screen and the slides?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Good. Well, thanks to Florence and Bérangère and the journal for actually putting that special issue on. I think it's an important topic. And it was a very nice process. So thanks for having us in that special issue, and also for organizing that webinar. So my name is Martina Battisti. I'm currently at Grenoble École de Management, and the article that we had in the special issue is with my colleagues Isabella Hattak from St. Gallen and with Haibu Su from the University of Nottingham in China. So what we looked at is rumination and entrepreneurial well-being, and so we looked at rumination as a concept that is a sort of a recurrent form of thought process that is related to negative events. And when sort of the COVID pandemic started and everything, we were trying to set up research about entrepreneurship in times of crisis more generally, but we're also looking at concepts that might be particularly relevant for that type of event that we were facing at the time. And rumination is something that is specifically relevant because it often happens in a context of uncertainty, and entrepreneurship is in general a context of uncertainty, and this was even sort of more prevalent during the pandemic. Rumination has been conceptualized as a cognitive mechanism that has adaptive and maladaptive functions. But in previous literature, the findings are pretty inconclusive and mostly talk about the maladaptive functions of rumination. So that rumination is actually something bad for your personal outcomes in terms of satisfaction, for example, but also for work-related outcomes. But what we were thinking was that there are actually two types of rumination. So you can ruminate about something more generally or about a very specific event. And that distinction hasn't been made very often in the literature. So we thought that that lack of distinction might be a reason why the results are pretty much inconclusive beforehand. So we also know from the literature in psychology that uncertainty can trigger rumination. So during the pandemic and the lockdown, we thought, well, that's kind of like a good situation. And we also know that it can have negative consequences on individuals' well-being. So in the context of entrepreneurship, we also know that well-being is different between different types of entrepreneurs, particularly sort of those that are self-employed or those that are employing. So that's sort of the background of the research. And as I said, we have set up a longitudinal project across 2.5 years during the pandemic. And in that article, we take the first 2 waves, which comprised sort of about 450 entrepreneurs in the UK who were self-employed. So, well, self-employed or employing, and were at least 7 months in business. So they were not super early startups, but sort of survived at least sort of the first couple of months. The data collection for that article was in 2 waves in October 2020 and in January 2021, where in the UK where those entrepreneurs were located was just during 2 very strict lockdowns. So we looked at change in subjective well-being that we measured as difference in life satisfaction between wave 2 and wave 1. And we, as we said, we looked at 2 types of rumination. So rumination in general, we measured with a Thurik scale, and then we used a new scale that was developed by a colleague by Isabella during COVID, which looked specifically at COVID-19 rumination as a specific type of rumination. We included self-employment as a dummy variable, as a moderator, and the whole analysis is at the within-person level because we looked at changes in life satisfaction within people from wave 2 to wave 1. So very broadly, what we basically found is that it's not so important that entrepreneurs ruminate or not, but it is more important what they ruminate about. So, excuse me. In our sample, we actually found that we have a relatively balanced sample of smaller businesses, more mature businesses. So I will probably describe it more as a small business sample rather than sort of a high growth, high tech entrepreneurship sample, with about half of the sample that were self-employed. And also in terms of the entrepreneurs, they tended to be more mature with 40 years of age. So the first finding that we found was that the pandemic and the lockdowns had very differential effect on individuals. So it was not all negative, but actually almost half of the entrepreneurs had positive effects and had an increase in life satisfaction. So that kind of confirmed what we knew at the firm level, that no matter what crisis that we find, at the firm level, there are always businesses who benefit from crisis. They always do well during crisis. Yeah? So it's not always bad news for all businesses during a crisis, but there always seems to be a percentage of businesses that does well. And that's the same at the individual level. And we know that meanwhile from other studies from the pandemic, that there was a certain group of people that actually really benefited from the lockdowns. And what we then found was that general rumination actually had adaptive effects, so they had positive effects and increased well-being, whereas specific rumination was maladaptive and decreased well-being. And we did explain that using control theory, saying that if you ruminate about a general situation about your business in general and performance of your business in general, you might have conclusions that you can generalize across different situations. Whereas with specific rumination, specifically with COVID-19, particularly at the early stages of the lockdowns, you might find it more difficult to find the general threat across what you find, and you find that you think a lot about it, but you don't quite know how you can transfer the conclusions that you come up with to other situations. So it's a lot of energy that you invest in something that you can't transfer easily to other situations. So, and we also found that sort of the negative effect of the specific rumination was more pronounced for solo self-employed entrepreneurs, possibly because they have more resource constraints, but it also shows that in the context of rumination, the task environment is a really important moderator. So the task environment of a self-employed person is different to someone who employs. And so it's not only necessarily relevant what we ruminate about, but in the context in which we ruminate. And the context here is sort of the task environment of entrepreneurs. And I think overall sort of that allows us to get a more nuanced conceptualization of rumination by differentiating between the specificity and the nature of rumination, and also understand rumination as an antecedent of well-being in entrepreneurship. So that was very short and hopefully captured the essence of the paper.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you, Martina. I see that we have some attendees that raise their hand. If you agree, maybe they have some question, we can ask them to ask their question. Aisha Fartas, I see that you have a question, or you raise your hand. I don't know if it's related to this paper.
Bérangère veut poser une question. Bérangère, ask a question.
Yes, thank you very much. About the negative effect of rumination, as a result, different from women or from men?
No, we didn't find any gender differences.
Okay, no. Okay, thank you.
We also controlled for a lot of family circumstances.
Yes.
Like the number of people in the household, if they had kids and all of that, but we didn't find any relevant controls.
That's interesting. Thank you.
Aisha, maybe if you want to ask, you can.
Il y a la question dans le chat.
Which specific practices have negative effects on well-being? That's a good question. So we couldn't go with the scales that we were using into the specific practices of rumination. We just knew that they were they had recurring negative thought processes about COVID-19 and the lockdown and the effects that it had on their businesses and on themselves. So that was sort of the how rumination was conceptualized, how they ruminated specifically in terms of the practice. I wouldn't be able to say no, sorry.
Maybe we can take last one question. Rob Verdun Ost, I'm sorry if I don't pronounce it well. Raise an hand. You can speak. Sometimes it's not people who raise their hand can speak. Yes, there's Sarah Marie, Rob, Ina.
I think Josh has got another question in the chat. Would group rumination help mitigate the negative effects if one is consumed too much by her own negative thought? That's a good question. Yeah, that was something that we were thinking about in terms of if you are a group of founders, for example, or even within a management team or something, what kind of interaction effects you have in terms of collective rumination, and we don't know that at the moment, but I think that would be a really interesting question to follow up, because I would think that has got an effect.
Great. Thank you very much, Martina. I will start to speak louder because as I understood that it's not easy to hear me. I can see that Olivier Torrès joined us. Maybe Olivier, you can say hi and make the time for Alexandra to prepare herself. Thank you very much, Martina. If we have other questions, of course, we will follow it to you. Thank you very much. I see some clapping.
Thanks as well. Thank you. If anyone has got any other questions, feel free to contact me or get in touch.
Thank you.
Okay, did you wanted me to present now, right? Or Olivier, did you want to say anything before? I'm not sure. Okay.
Time for the speakers.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I tried to share my screen then. Hopefully that is going to work as well. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
That
yes,
is really strange because my...
Yes.
Okay, so I try to get you on the other screen, makes it easier for me. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for the possibility to present our work here, and thank you very much for the work on the special issue. I'm going to present our paper, Working Hours, Working Time Flexibility and Stress at Work of Different Types of Entrepreneurs. This is a joint work done by Jan Block, Jose Milan, Juan Ramos, and myself. And what do we want to talk about here in this paper? So we had a look at the literature, and we saw that there are a number of work stressors which have been found in the past, particular working hours and working time flexibility, which are always often summarized as working time quality as well. And they show a modest to strong direct and indirect correlation with health and well-being. We also see that depending on the employment, the nature, size, and specific characteristics of work stressors, as well as their consequences for the individual's health, do differ. And that is what exactly where we wanted to dig deeper into, because we saw that in the past, typically self-employed individuals are treated as a more homogeneous group. And we said, okay, but self-employed are not that homogeneous. We have different types of self-employment out there. And yeah, how does it look in those different groups of self-employment? So that is exactly what we did in our study. So we had to look at the working hours, flexibility, and the perceived stress at work of different types of self-employed compared to wage-employed individuals. So why is that important? Because we also saw in the literature that stress at work also has an effect on health and well-being of people. And therefore, we see that if we have here an effect, this might be or might explain the specific career paths particular people are going to take. So for that, we came up with a number of research questions. So first of all, we wanted to have a deeper look into different types of self-employed individuals. We have mainly two groups. I have to say that here, so it gets easier to understand in the following, that we have two main groups of self-employed. The one is the self-employed with employees, and the other one is the solo self-employed. But in this group of the solo self-employed, we have two different types again. So these are the independent ones, which really work for themselves on their own account. But we also have this very specific group of dependent self-employed, which are self-employed individuals, but they work for one client, so for one company. So it's often not the result of particular motivation to become self-employed, but a result of outsourcing activities of companies to become self-employed for particular people. So, and that explains hopefully why we came up with those hypotheses. So first of all, we had a deeper look into this group of solo self-employed and compared dependent and independent self-employed. And we expected that dependent self-employed have less working hours than independent self-employed, because they might not be that motivated to follow an opportunity, to follow their own way, but they are more working for a particular company. And that also has an effect on their working time flexibility, because as they depend on one particular company, they have to stick to the working hours of the company, to the hierarchy levels of the company, and so on. And then we compared the self-employed with employees with those without employees. And we argue that self-employed with employees have more working hours. You can argue the other way around and say, okay, you have more shoulders where you can transfer the work to. But on the other hand, you have more tasks to manage. Yeah, so you have management tasks, and perhaps you have more pressure to be there because you need to be there for your employees. But on the other hand, we also believe that those people have more flexibility because they can, if they have some personal things to do, they can say, hey, can you do that for me at the moment? I will be back in half an hour or whatsoever. So they have more flexibility over their own time schedule. In the second research question, then we looked on the working hours and working time flexibility and the perceived stress at work. Why perceived stress at work? Because it's a self-reporting measure, because people said, I feel pressured at work or I don't feel pressured. So it's the perceived stress of the individual. And perhaps not so surprisingly, we argue that more working hours increase the level of perceived stress at work, and more working time flexibility decreases the perceived stress at work. And finally, in our last question, we had a deeper look into the extent of work, or how the working hours and working time flexibility explain the differences in perceived work stress between different groups of self-employed. And we argue that more working hours and less working time flexibility explain at least partially the effect of self-employment type on the perceived stress at work. Yeah, what did we do? We had a large data set. So the data set is the European Working Conditions Survey. And we took 2 waves there. Here you can see the specifics. More important is who did we have in our sample. We had 46,000 observations. And these are men and women between 18 and 65 years old, which work at least 15 hours a week. And for the empirical framework, yeah, we did some regressions, overlaps, and ordered logic regressions to look at our hypothesis. What are our dependent variables? Dependent variable is, for once, the working hours. It's a continuous variable varying between 15 to 100 hours per week. And we have working time flexibility, which is a discrete variable because we have categories. People could say, yeah, I have a lot of possibilities to arrange my own schedule, or I don't have, and those in between. And we have the perceived stress at work, which is also discrete because it was from, they answer a 1 when never a stress at work, and 5 if they always have stress at work, and the levels in between. The main independent variables I already talked about, the occupational status. So we have the self-employed with and without employees, and there again, those 2 groups. And our reference category are the waged employed. We have to consider, or have to say, that 90% of our sample are waged employed individuals, but we have 10% which are solo self-employed or self-employed with employees. We also use working hours and working time flexibility to test the effect of stress at work here. And we have a large number of control variables ranging from educational attainment to job-related aspects, demographic indicators, and so on and so on. So this survey gives a lot of possibilities to control for a number of different effects here. So what are our results? So we were surprised to see that we do not have any difference between the solo self-employed related to working hours and working time flexibility. So there was no statistical difference between those 2 groups. But what we did see was that the self-employed with employees have more working hours than the solo self-employed. But they do not have more flexibility. This was surprising for us because we really expected that they will have more flexibility in their working schedule. Not so surprisingly, our hypotheses were supported that more working hours increase the perceived stress at work, and decrease, and more working time flexibility decrease the perceived stress at work. And finally, what we did find of our hypothesis 5C is that the hypothesis was that more working hours and less working time flexibility explain partially the effect of self-employment type on the perceived stress at work. And we find that working hours seem to partially mediate the effect of type of self-employed on the perceived stress at work. Yeah, what are the conclusions from that? So what do we draw from that? We see that, first of all, self-employed should not be treated as a homogeneous group. The second one is that longer working hours and less working time flexibility increase the perceived stress at work. And finally, the perceived stress at work is not solely influenced by the working conditions, but also by other aspects. So what are the implications from that? So we see that staying small might be more desirable if you really look at your working hours and your working time flexibility and your perceived stress at work. But this is perhaps not that what we want, yeah, from an economic perspective, because entrepreneurs might choose, when these things are important, not to grow. Yeah, and as I said, that might not be an economic preferable perspective here. The second thing is that it has been argued that individuals with lower working time quality and higher stress level have more health problems. So which could indicate here that our self-employed might have more health problems due to those effects we found in our study. And finally, self-employment might not be desirable if work-life balance is an important value of the entrepreneurs. However, we have to say here that we did not have a look at the satisfaction at work. And we believe that, and prior research has shown that satisfaction also has to do with stress and health and well-being of the entrepreneur. So in the future, it would be very interesting to have a deeper look at the job satisfaction as well, but that was not possible here. So we only had a look at really working hours and working time flexibility and how that affects the perceived stress level at work. Yeah, with that, I want to conclude. Thank you very much. And I don't know if you have time for questions.
Yes, maybe we can use the Q&A if you have a question for Alexandra.
Yeah, I have a small question.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah, I was a late. Had a late arrival. So I have several Zoom accounts. So okay, I don't know, but I'm in. Yeah, I mean, you won't be surprised that I'm very interested in the way you measure stress and whether there were differences in well, okay, how do you measure stress? How was it measured?
So it was measured. It is a question in the survey, and people are asked how stressed they feel at work. So it's a perceived stress measure, how much you feel stressed, and you could answer on a scale of 1 to 5 from never to always.
Yeah. Okay. So you didn't use one of the validated burnout, but okay.
No. Because this is we could just use the measures which were included in the survey, and we have this stress measure as, therefore we always talk about perceived stress level, because it is how I feel myself stressed or not. Indeed.
Yeah. Okay. So and then you have this difference between, you have a wall of results. So I lose a bit the overview, but that's why you're still there to help us out. I mean, you have the dependent and the independent solos. Huh? And that's a fascinating discrimination, of course, because the dependent are halfway employment. Huh?
Yes.
So it's some sort of, and is it the stress levels between the two types of solos? What can you say about the difference between the two in terms of stress?
There was no statistical difference between the two types of solo self-employed. The only thing we really find is that self-employed with employees are more stressed than the solo self-employed, interestingly. So we would have expected differences there as well, but we could not find any difference here.
No. Also, if you control these stress levels for their self-reflection on flexibility and working hours and type of business, then even not controlled for all this, there are differences in stress levels.
No, as I said, so we tried everything to have a deeper look into that, but we really did not see any difference here, which was really surprising for us as well, because we really thought that there will be a difference between these two groups, and that was very interesting. So perhaps there are different or other aspects which might explain something here, which are not, let's say, working time quality aspects, so working hours and flexibility. But we could not measure those.
Yeah, these reasonings go to. Oh, am I interrupting the organization of it all?
No. You gave time to Josh to type his question, so it was perfect on my part.
Otherwise, no, because I can. Like you said in the introduction, I mean, the dependent versus the independent, there's two ways. If you have one client, okay, great, but it's also stressful to have only one client. And so these two movements, they probably cancel out. I understand. Yeah. Do you understand this, Olivier? You're the king of stress.
Techno stress,
for
example.
General stress. Stress. The stress you and me experience.
But effectively, for your future research, the distinction between challenge stressor and hindrance stressor, it's a good opportunity, I think.
Maybe there's several. That's why I asked the question: how do you measure? Because Olivier then came up with this burnout measures, which then replace stress. The self-perception of burnout is predecessor of stress, or the other way around. And in between all the dimensions of this burnout, you can then distinguish between where does the stress come from. Is it, and then you could distinguish: is it the amount of work, or is it the stress that you have only one client, etc.?
And we completely agree. Therefore, we put it in our limitations as well, that we only looked at those measures, and that there are a lot of other measures which would be really, really interesting to have a deeper look into. So it's more like the first idea to go into these different groups of self-employed and have a deeper look into that. And there is a lot of work to do to really understand how they differ.
The size of the business, once you have employees, is that known?
I'm sorry?
The size of the business, is that known for those who have employees?
I don't think so. I would have to check, but I think it's just if you have employees or not. It's not the size of how many employees you do have.
Alexandra, we have a question from Josh on the Q&A.
I have to have a look at it. Have you also control for how long a specific type of entrepreneur enter that type of entrepreneurship? No, we don't have this data. So this is another limitation. So we don't have longitudinal data where we can see that, how long they are already in there. Hopefully that already answers that, because I think what's going on then is an explanation for this. But I agree. It would be very interesting as well, because there should be difference there.
Great. Thank you very much, Alexandra, for this great paper.
Thank you very much.
He's looking forward to reading.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And I really enjoy reading all of your paper, Martina's paper, Alexandra's paper. Now, maybe Jana, if you are ready, we can have your presentation.
Absolutely. Great. Definitely. So let me share my screen here. Is that, wait, screen share, there we go. And then I'm making this a bit larger. All right, so Thank you also, everyone, from my side. So thanks to everyone who is tuning in, and thank you to Florence and the entire editorial team for organizing this webinar and giving us an opportunity here really to share with the broader audience our paper on entrepreneurial teams and individual well-being. This is joint work with Nathan Smith from Coventry University and with Robert Webker from the University of Utah. And in this paper, my colleagues and I are looking at health through a well-being lens, well-being in the entrepreneurial context, as many of you probably know, defined as the overall experience of satisfaction, positive affect, and general psychological functioning and health in relation to the entrepreneurial activity. And what we're trying to do in this paper is really to connect that emerging conversation around well-being and psychological health of entrepreneurs with the research on entrepreneurial teams. So prior well-being research has directed our attention to the fact that the tasks entrepreneurs perform can generally support individual well-being through their positive impact on basic psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And these needs have shown generally to be a universal driver of functioning, human functioning, and psychological health. Now, at the same time, prior research in entrepreneurship and on entrepreneurial teams specifically has also highlighted, of course, that entrepreneurial venturing is not exactly a walk in the park. And we've heard already ample example here in the previous presentations. And the literature really documents consistently the high pressure, high emotionality, many other socio-psychological challenges, really like isolation, long work hours, that all obviously weigh very heavily on entrepreneurs and can, as you can well imagine, create overall need thwarting conditions. So collectively, what the research has carved out here is a clear perspective really on that extreme nature of the entrepreneurial context and the substantial stress and demands placed on entrepreneurs, which are not exactly conducive to need fulfillment. So this emphasis on extreme has let us look at the research on extreme teams and what that research would help us understand about drivers of healthy functioning in such extreme contexts. So think extreme context, think of Mars missions, polar expeditions, special rescue missions, and so forth. So all types of environments in which teams operate fully autonomously under isolation, confinement, and other extreme conditions. So not exactly an environment that would foster natural harmony and well-being, as this quote here highlights. All the conditions necessary for murder are met if you shut two men in a cabin measuring 18 by 20 feet. So, and that extreme teams literature has shown consistently that thriving in such a context is highly dependent on the social dynamics that a team can create and individual regulation, self-regulation strength, which has made us curious to dig a bit deeper in understanding, so how does that then play out in entrepreneurship? How do the dynamics of entrepreneurial teams impact indeed the functioning of individual team members, in particular their well-being? And we go about this in our paper through developing a simple conceptual model that will then obviously help us later to devise the data collection and empirical research strategy. So in setting the scene, we are adding here to the prior research on entrepreneurial teams the important proposition that team dynamics, which are obviously a very highly studied element in entrepreneurship, that these team dynamics do not only link to the overall team performance as we typically look at, but that these team dynamics are also crucially impacting the experience of individual well-being. So factors like conflict or team cohesion and their nature and quality can really either contribute need supporting or need thwarting conditions and thus impact the psychological well-being and health of a team member. Now, to what extent that social stress, if you will, plays out at the individual level is highly dependent on the ability of the individual to regulate their mental and emotional states that emerge from these stressful conditions, right? So typically, individuals have command over a certain range or repertoire, if you will, of behavioral strategies that they can more or less flexibly deploy. So think, for example, the skill to reframe a situation before you act, or to focus on a task rather than on a problem, both rather productive coping mechanisms. At the same time, there are also, of course, unfortunately, more maladaptive behavior, substance abuse, for example, or disengagement, procrastination. And we've seen earlier in a presentation, also rumination can be either positive, but could also have negative consequences. So these are all self-regulation strategies. And what we posit here in an extension of our baseline model is basically, we're trying to make the argument for two important dynamic interactions. Number one, here in proposition 3, we argued that individuals with a higher self-regulation flexibility, that means people that have a broader range of repertoire of regulatory behaviors and that can better draw or have a better contextual awareness and can draw on the right regulation strategies in a certain situations, will by and large also be experiencing higher well-being in a team context, right? They are better equipped, if you will, to regulate their emotional and behavioral responses to what is coming at them from the team, so to speak. So there's a moderating quality. On the other hand, in proposition 4, and that's quite important for us, we also try to outline or be built on findings in the extreme teams literature, that there's actually a recursive influence between the team dynamics and the ability of an individual to draw on their repertoire of self-regulation in the first place. So to illustrate that argument in a more simple way, I think we all here know that sometimes, on sometimes of a day, typically toward the end, of the evening, or we haven't eaten well enough, people tend to get a bit more cranky. Yeah, so we may not be our best selves, so to speak, and that is exactly a sign of diminished ability to deploy basically situation appropriate behavior. And we argue that such dynamics will also or can also occur over time in response to team dynamics, right? So there might be a compounding tax, or of course also compounding positive interaction between team dynamics over time and how well an individual team member can deploy self-regulation capacity and thus experience well-being outcomes. So in a nutshell, right, in this paper, we argued that entrepreneurial team dynamics are critical inputs to the well-being of entrepreneurs, and individual regulatory differences in capacity and flexibility build important interaction effects really between team processes and the experience of psychological health and well-being outcomes. We believe this has a number of interesting implications, right? First, of course, because much of entrepreneurship happens in a team context, the entrepreneurial team and the dynamics that the team create can really or should really be understood as an important contextual stressor with crucial impact on individual co-founders and their psychological well-being as a result in functioning. So social context really matters, if you will, and individuals matter in their ability to regulate and function well in such a context. Then second, that has obviously interesting implications in the return, right? So future research should certainly look here into how individual well-being plays then back into team dynamics. Think about also how teams may be able to create their very own unique regulatory functioning. And finally, what we find very important here for us in this research is to see that this also has practical implications. So if you believe that effective self-regulation is key to entrepreneuring, then we actually also have something to teach above and beyond the more material skills of validating ideas, building prototypes, and so forth. So with having said that, thank you so much for your attention. And if you would like to get in touch here, the contact information of the 3 authors, feel free to approach us. Many thanks. And I'm happy to take, of course, also questions now.
Thank you very much, Jana. Such an interesting topic, and we were really happy that you propose us this article in this special issue. Such a new approach and adding team dynamics if you have questions, feel free to type in the Q&A box.
Yeah. Can I ask a question?
For sure.
Absolutely.
Can you move back one slide? We are now on slide 10, and can we go back to slide 9?
Yeah, let me, this one here, the contribution,
And then the first bullet and the third element, move from trait-based view to dynamic circular interplay. Okay, that sounds logic, and that's the way it probably works. But if you don't want to measure, what do you do? I mean, because we measure at a certain time, we
challenge,
observe, or we have self-reflection, and then that is trait-based. So how does it work? I mean, what is?
So what we find very interesting is to really bring in the time aspect. So you have to, and that's a challenging, like there's a reason why right now it's a conceptual paper, let's be honest. So there's a challenge, of course, in tracking teams and the status of the well-being of individual members within the teams over time. But that is certainly important to really understand both teams, but also how individuals experience outcomes from that team process. And in addition to that, why that is actually really an important thing we try to post, self-regulation is to some extent also a learned behavior. And we believe that there could be both positive but also negative, but let's focus here on the second for positive, on positive, because I really like the positive impact. So we know from prior research, right? And Martina also has presented interesting research on rumination, for example. So we do know that some individuals, when they experience stress, are more prone to rumination, maybe hesitation, inaction, and so forth. What is very interesting to think about is that probably a very positive team dynamic. So if a team can basically build positive peer teaching, if you will, how to deal with a stressful situation, that can help entrepreneurs which may have a certain natural tendency to engage in maybe unproductive or maladaptive behavior, they can learn over time, that would be one of our assertions, to develop better coping mechanisms. So that was very important for us to understand here and try to point out.
Extent do you have to here divert from the generic team literature? I mean, is there some central statistic where you built in the entrepreneurial effect of a team? Is that the leader effect? Is that the joint feeling of risk?
That is a very good question. Thank you for posting that. I will also make a note. We probably have to think a little bit more about that. So we built a lot our insights on findings from extreme contexts. So really think of NASA putting together, teams that go up to space, or polar expeditions, and how to design those teams. And there is something to be said about the way how these teams create an interaction with each other. So there's not so much right now about the specific leader, but probably adaptive leadership and how these teams build their mutual and team interactions with each other that help create interesting dynamics that support or potentially also thwart, of course, the needs of individual members. So we build very much right now on the extreme teams literature and the findings there, and we believe that actually could feed back in an interesting way also to how we look at entrepreneurial teams, right? We all know we study conflict a lot, we do study cohesion a lot, but I don't think that we study so much how these social interactions of a team also emerge as a contribution of individual adaptation, behavior, and regulation.
That's what you see more and more in the end. Oh, sorry.
Yes, the time flies. But for those who want to stay after, for sure. Sorry, Roy, we have one presentation. I want to thank Jana for her presentation, and for sure, if we have some time after, you are welcome to stay. Kelly, if you are ready.
Sure. Yes.
It'd be great. Thank you very much, Jana, again. And we are ready to hear.
Thank you. Thank you for that opportunity.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present my work today. My name is Kelly, and I'm currently a PhD candidate in entrepreneurship at Syracuse University. I'm very thrilled to be here today to present my paper titled The Association Between Physical and Psychiatric Disabilities and Entrepreneurial Intention Among College Students. And this paper is a collaboration between myself and my colleagues at Syracuse University, including Dr. Johan Wiklund, who is my advisor, Dr. Melissa Luke, Dr. Kevin Ansher, and Dr. Daryl Hills. Okay, let's get started. It's no secret that entrepreneurship is particularly attractive to people outside the norms of the regular labor market, particularly people with disabilities. However, most research in disabilities and entrepreneurship has focused on the impact of a single disability rather than considering the effects of multiple disabilities. Additionally, previous studies have only examined either symptoms or formal diagnosis, but not both. In order to better understand the link between disabilities and entrepreneurship in various contexts and address gaps in previous studies, our paper explores how physical and psychiatric disabilities are associated with college students' entrepreneurial intentions. Specifically, we examine the impact of hearing and mobility difficulties as physical disabilities, and ADHD, dyslexia, depression, and anxiety as psychiatric disabilities. The theoretical framework that guides our study is person-environment fit theory. So basically, we argue that entrepreneurship presents a good PE fit for people with disabilities. For instance, people with physical disabilities often encounter various challenges in traditional work environments. In contrast, entrepreneurship can provide physical accommodations and greater flexibility. Additionally, people with physical disabilities tend to have confidence in the competencies and skills required for entrepreneurship by drawing on their life experiences. Furthermore, people with physical disabilities can develop effective coping strategies that are beneficial in business settings. Given those factors, we propose that physical disabilities are positively associated with entrepreneurial intentions. Similarly, research indicates that people with psychiatric disabilities like ADHD, dyslexia, depression, and anxiety tend to struggle in regular employment. At the same time, certain internal characteristics associated with these disabilities may be conducive to entrepreneurship. For example, ADHD symptoms are linked to increased creativity, risk-taking, novelty seeking, and intense concentration. Or dyslexia is also related to increased creativity and cognitive abilities. Based on those arguments, we propose that psychiatric disabilities, including ADHD, dyslexia, depression, and anxiety, are positively associated with entrepreneurial intentions. We conducted an online survey of business school students, both graduates and undergraduates at a private university in the northeastern United States. Our sampling frame consisted of approximately 2,200 students, and we received 302 complete responses. Our sample demographics showed that nearly 60% of respondents were female. Over 70% were white. The average age was 21.92 years old. Additionally, more than 14% had startup experience, and over 35% were currently attempting to start a business. Generally, we use well-validated scales to assess entrepreneurial intention and disabilities, including symptoms and formal diagnosis of ADHD, dyslexia, depression, anxiety, hearing, and mobility difficulties. So our main findings are, interestingly, that none of the explanatory variables emerged as statistically significant, meaning that no hypothesis is supported. However, we did uncover some noteworthy findings, like male students had higher entrepreneurial intention than female students. White students had lower entrepreneurial intentions than students of color. Female students reported higher depression and anxiety than male students, and white students reported lower depression than students of color. But I want to spend some time talking about the statistically insignificant results of our study. In fact, the statistically insignificant findings are quite surprising and challenge previous studies. It means that the link between entrepreneurial intention and disabilities may not always hold true in different settings. There could be several explanations to our findings. First, students with little work experience may not find entrepreneurship any more attractive than traditional employment. They may not be able to recognize entrepreneurial opportunities due to their limited knowledge and experience, and therefore still aspire to get a more traditional job. A second explanation could be that college students with disabilities may be provided with school-based interventions and counseling that could support them in terms of career orientation. The study participants might come from high-income families and receive good treatment, and thus they may be in less need to recognize entrepreneurial opportunities, and thus they have lower entrepreneurial intention. And finally, the unexpectedness of our findings could be attributed to cultural factors, meaning that students with disabilities in different parts of the world may experience different levels of difficulty. That is, students with disabilities in America may face less significant challenges than students with disabilities in other countries, and thereby not demonstrate strong entrepreneurial intention. So future studies on disabilities and entrepreneurial intentions should be replicated in different cultural and social contexts, and also investigate the moderating factors that could potentially strengthen or weaken the relationship between disabilities and entrepreneurial intentions, such as school and social support or family financial background. Okay, thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation today. If you have any questions about the research, please don't hesitate to contact me at the email address displayed on the screen. And I really appreciate your attention and interest in this topic. Thank you so much. And I'm also willing to take any questions right now.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you very much. Josh has a question in a Q&A. I don't know if you are able to read it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So there is one question. Can we really aggregate ADHD, depression, and anxiety together? ADHD may indeed drive creativity, but severe depression and anxiety tend to undermine an individual's daily functionality, which probably reduce his or her entrepreneurial intention. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to look at these disabilities separately? Yes, thank you, John. I totally agree with you that we should not aggregate all those disabilities together. For our study, we still measure each of the disabilities separately, and we put them into the models. So basically, we we analyze one disability controlling for other disabilities. We don't really group all the disorders into one measure.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, this is really one of the best studies I ever read, having so-called zero results. Huh? So
Yes,
you and that's why we were so. It's part of the special issue, of course. Huh? Okay. Is there, look, you can do these studies for scientific reasons, but also for clinical reasons. Huh? Is there something hidden in your results so that you can say, well, I mean, maybe students in general with disabilities of whatever kind, they have a lower intention to set up a business, but what can we do about it?
Yes.
Given that we know from other studies that indeed they are more inclined to think about setting up a business. I mean, we all know the social isolation theories of immigrants and minorities, and you could see the disabled as also some sort of minority. What can we do? Is there a clinical angle to this?
Yes, that's a great question. I totally agree with you that there could be some clinical aspects of those findings. So for example, we find that white students had lower entrepreneurial intentions than students of color, meaning that people from minority groups tend to pursue entrepreneurship compared to white students. So that could be something for counselors or school officials to consider when they provide the support for their students.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. You're aware that the bias of those handicapped students who answer and those who do not is immense. Huh? Recent irritation about the consequences for their disabilities gives them a higher chance of responding than those who
Yes. So in the paper, in the paper we also mentioned we conducted some non-response bias t-test to make sure that there is no statistical difference between people responded to the survey and people didn't complete the survey.
Yeah, you have another important result, and that is, if I remember well, some 15% have had a startup experience or something. Huh?
Yes.
That is a high, if you compare it to any students, that's a relatively high number, I would say. Huh? No?
Yes, probably because the sample comes from business school. That's why there is a significant portion of
Yes.
participants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very important study. Yeah.
Yes, we have to, the people are telling me that they really appreciate your work, Kelly, and unfortunately it's, we use more time than intended. And thank you very much, Kelly, for sharing this work. I know that Josh has a question. If you can really quickly answer it in the Q&A, it will be much appreciated. Thank you very much, all of you, the author, Bérangère, the co-authors that organized this webinar with me, to be there with us, to join us today. I just want to, in order to conclude this webinar, ask you a quick question. And I think you will have access to it. I don't know if the panelists have access to it. I just want to ask you this question and conclude and make a small teaser about our article. And I want to know what you think about this question. The company is part of the entrepreneur's identity. Do you want strongly disagree or 5 strongly agree? It's a wake-up pool, it's a wake-up question in order to help me do the teasing of the introductive article and, of course, conclude this webinar.
I can't vote.
I can't.
And the panelists,
The host, yeah. Just the
Yeah,
host. And the
I would
panelists
love
can
to
vote.
vote as well.
you can tell us at the end what you think.
Florence, apologies, I need to leave. Thank you so much,
Martina.
also to the entire editorial team for organizing that. Thanks for all the questions and take care. It was a real pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you very much. Okay, I will end the poll and share the results. I don't know if you can see it. So most of you say, 50 of you say for, like I agree, and 30% say strongly agree. So why I ask this question, Olivier and I asked this question to entrepreneurs. Me asked this question to 300 entrepreneurs in Quebec, and Olivier asked this question to more than 900 entrepreneurs in France, and around more than 80% say agree to strongly agree. So I take 1 minute of your time to make this small teaser about the wonderful article Olivier wrote with the help of Roy and myself on another way to approach entrepreneurship through philosophical perspective, namely existentialism perspective. So it's a branch of philosophy that considers that people are in charge in their own destiny, responsible for their deeds, and free to decide which values and norms will guide them. So the small teaser is that in this article, we approach entrepreneurship through this perspective, and the result is 3S: self-subordination, with an enterprise in the center of the entrepreneur's identity and thought. The entrepreneur will tend to see his company at the center of his world, or her world, of course. Salutogenesis, the exasperation of salutogenic factor, and the suffering. So I will not say a lot about this because the time already finished, but I hope you will read this introductory article, because we will offer an interesting perspective about the question you just answered and what we think about it in this article. So please feel free to read it, to ask us questions about it, and of course, this is the introduction article, but all the special issue have wonderful articles. Thank you, Martina just leave. Thank you, Jana, Alexandra, Kelly, for the time you give us today. Thank you also to Stephanie and Etienne on February for the time they give us. Also, please read this special issue, ask us question. You can send me the question and I will follow up to the author. And let's stay in touch for new information, new results, new theory about this challenging field about entrepreneurship and health. So this is the conclusion. I will put the link in the special issue again in the chat. And thank you very much to join us today. It was really a great pleasure for us to be with you all today.